Good morning, everyone. I'd like to give you a brief overview of the survey and what questions we actually looked at. It was a global survey, although the majority of the participants come from Europe with 77%. We asked about current challenges that require action in the data warehouse. We asked about what kind of modernization approaches and technologies enterprises choose to modernize their data warehouse. And we also asked about benefits and improvements achieved. In summary, we asked 6 questions, and you can read the detailed answers in the actual survey document. And as a management summary, we generated 6 hotspots, and we will be looking at a couple of the hotspots in the survey today in our discussion round later on. Before we dig into the actual results, I would like to give you an overview of the background where we started from and where most enterprises start from as well. We are currently still working with the classic data warehouse concept that was practically founded in the 1990s, the notion of a business intelligence factory that said, well, our operational systems are not fit enough to do analysis directly on the source data, and the source data isn't fit enough either. So we will transport the data in a separate environment, build a data warehouse to be able to ask questions about what happened in the last weeks, in the last months, perhaps in comparison with the same time frame of the last year. So we looked at what happened, and sometimes we even started to look at why things happened. This was based on the notion of having a single point of truth. But currently, we see that enterprises are not happy with their classic BI environments. Business users find that the data warehouse does not deliver what they need. Reports are perhaps not giving them the answers they want to have. They don't see the right KPIs or don't understand the ones they do. This is making them or forcing them often to pull data from the data warehouse and other sources and to author their own reports, and that is frequently done in Microsoft Excel. This, of course, does not help them be very efficient, and it is not effective either. It limits agility and flexibility, and is frequently a compliance issue as well. And of course, when people are just pulling data from the data warehouse and using it on their desktop in any way they find is helpful, of course, this is undermining the actual goal of the data warehouse to be a single point of truth. So that's one challenge that enterprises are facing today. But of course, we are looking at extended requirements for the future as well. On one hand, enterprises want to monitor what is happening in their operational processes. They want to look at what is interesting and what perhaps requires real-time or near-time need for action. On the other hand, we have additional data sources, new data sources we are not yet familiar with, and we have new analytical methods we want to apply to the new data, to data we have used before but want to use it in a different way and in different combinations too. So here we're actually looking at a new concept of data management that says the data warehouse, the well-ordered data warehouse is not sufficient. I also need a data lake, a collection of raw data that allows me to base my analytics on all data that I have available, and not only the data that was found relevant for the data warehouse and for company management that is served out of the data warehouse. At the same time, the new insights we generate based on the questions, what will happen? If I use data to foresee the future, of course, I want to use that to generate a business benefit in my operational processes by using this prediction to actually find out what I should do and to do prediction and prescription directly in my operational environment. However, that means that I need to be able to use data at different touch points. The data warehouse as a physical single point of truth is not sufficient to serve these needs. I have to transform to a more logical data landscape that is integrated from a content point of view, but may well mean that I need data on different physical touch points, perhaps even based on different technology. And that will need other approaches than the classic data warehouse approach. That was one of the reasons why we reached out to our participants and asked them to tell us what is their data warehouse and analytics environment today. And we asked them to characterize it according to these 5 answers. And it's kind of like a maturity model that says you might have started out with localized data processing, so localized data processing in certain lines of business, and it's not coordinated, and there's not a standardized or centralized BI strategy behind it. Moving on to decentralized data marts that do not have a single point of truth as in terms of a data warehouse underneath, but perhaps are using the same infrastructure. Moving on to an integrated data warehouse infrastructure, which is usually exactly the goal the majority of enterprises have today, to build that central data warehouse and to have organized data marts that are being fed out of this data warehouse based on a central infrastructure, standardized tools, and a strategic roadmap to move this on in the future. However, we also see more mature enterprises that are moving on to a more flexible data and process architecture and enabling the use of standardized enterprise data and KPIs in various environments, so not only limited to the data warehouse. In this case, they also need other technologies, such as perhaps virtualization, perhaps as sandboxes, perhaps operational data stores, streaming technology, data preparation for data discovery, etc. And then perhaps the top maturity level, having agile, interoperable data services, so that I can actually use data in many different contexts and many different contact points. We grouped these answers into 3 groups and said, well, first we have the leaders in the top 2 levels of maturity. We have the largest group of the followers, and we have the laggards in the first 2 maturity levels. And we'll be coming back to that later on because there are some interesting findings here. We also asked participants to characterize what role they have in the company, what position they have, and we actually had a list of 15 different positions people could choose from. And for our cross-analysis, we bundled these roles into BI and analytics roles, so people that are in competency centers that manage business intelligence and or analytics, people in the lines of business, the business roles, that could be BI-related roles, analytics-related roles, or perhaps pure play business roles such as controller or business analyst. But the basic notion was here to group people that are actually sitting in business. And then the third very interesting group we looked at is the roles that are in the executive level of the enterprise. And again, here we had some interesting insights that we will get to later on, because it's basically, when you look at the general, at the summarized answers people give, that's one picture. But when you look at specific subgroups, you'll see that there are different perspectives. I'd like to pass on to Fred.
Hello, everyone. My name is Frederick. I'm part of the WhereScape EMEA team, and I would like to give you a very short introduction into the WhereScape value proposition, but broadly speaking, in what automation can bring to the table as part of this discussion today. So our customer landscapes are changing. As Jacqueline was already explaining, is that days are gone that every single data set that needed some analytics or reporting on went from the operational system into the data warehouse, was unlocked with a report on top of that, and then provided to the customer. That has changed. We have power users, we have data scientists. So what we see is different ways of getting the data into your data platform, and your data platform might not be a unique physical instance, but might be a combination of different technologies grouped together in the notion of a logical warehouse. Those components can be data stores, on-prem, cloud, a combination of both, using classical RDBMS systems, MPP systems, Hadoop clusters as a target. What you also see in the screen is that as part of designing a warehouse, you need to come up with a lot of cool ideas and implementations. You need to make decisions on which methodology I'm going to use. So if I create that centralized store of my information, how am I going to structure that? And so this is kind of the arena in which WhereScape, and broadly speaking, automation wants to play a role. It's not just about, if you would choose for the coolest or one of the coolest trending now cloud databases as a target, they offer you out of the box a lot of ease. They make a lot of things a lot easier. You can spin up more compute when required. You need less very dedicated technical DBA skills to manage that environment. So a lot of great things, but the big but here is that you still need to build it. You still need to architect your solution on top of that, come up with a way of working. A cloud database without the right ecosystem around it will never be successful. And that's what automation might bring to the table. So this is our classical architecture slide, which we use in virtually every discussion with a customer. The idea here is that what I want to emphasize is that when you use automation, you do not have people code things by hand. Everything is driven from metadata. So the idea is that metadata is captured, and that metadata is combined with patterns and then leads to repeatable code technical artifacts. You also see there ELT. I didn't knock up this slide 5 minutes ago. I made a typing error and misspelled ETL there. ELT means that we use your infrastructure in a different way than traditional integration tools. Is that traditional integration tools will do all the processing and then push the final data sets into your data platform. We are going to use your data platform and are going to generate native code for your underlying data platform. So what you now see highlighted is your target database, whether it is an on-prem Teradata, SQL Server, Exadata, a cloud, Azure, Redshift, Snowflake, a Hadoop cluster, that's irrelevant, but we get the data in EL, and then we use your target platform to process the data from the source layout into the required target layout. And how we're doing that is that isolated data marts, as some are doing. Is it creating that big data foundation with on top of that dependent data mart? That is your choice. So we as an automation vendor, we do not impose any specific architecture on you. We let you make those choices. So whether your architecture is the classical ODS, let's build an ODS with on top of that star schemas, or you're choosing data vault, which has become trending all over the world as a more modern style of organizing your data objects, where you're choosing raw vaults and business vaults, or raw vaults with star schemas, which is a different twist on things. Or maybe you want to use the three logical concepts together. So we are flexible. We are there to help you automate that, and I'll go in more detail what that means. But you are in the design seat. So you make the choices, you own the choices. Which technologies are you using? Which platforms are you using, or combination of platforms? And then on top of that, which layered architecture are you using? What we do see is a big push towards, how can I organize my data in a layered approach where things like auditability, how can I trace back, if I represent here a figure somewhere in the report, how can I trace back where the data comes from, even if over time that data has been changed in the source system or even purged from the source system. So that's an important role. Auditability also, how do you handle GDPR? How can you make sure that customer sensitive data is isolated and is handled in a particular way? Those are kind of new challenges that have come appeared over the last years and have become more important and have influenced people how they architect their warehouse. And we as WhereScape, we've been around for 20 years. We just help you then automate it and do it in the most efficient way. So you make your choices, and then people say, well, that's what we want. We just want to create a source design and then say, hey, let's now push it into a data vault, for instance, and have that. But actually, if we engage with the prospect, the customer, and with the IT department, and if we take into account all the requirements, GDPR, auditability, and so on, that they need to respect, is that conversation turns into this kind of process flow, where we have data architects. And can I please, for all the data architects who are on the call, or people who have data architects within their team, do a big shout out, because I do think that data architects are underused and are the ideal bridge between business and IT. So if you have people who play that role, are they used to their 100% full advantage or not? Please look into that, because we truly think that they play a vital role in the whole setup. But if your organization, because data warehousing, analytics, you're not on your own island. You're part of a bigger organization with enterprise architects. So you might have to interact with corporate enterprise models. So what we bring to the table is that this is a complex picture. We all agree on that one. But what if that complete picture can be 100% automated your way, based on your internal processes? That's what automation brings to the table. And that's a big difference with a homemade generation tool, because this goes a lot further. But typically, if you look at how do I get a data set from a source system into my target system, is that you need to do a lot of different activities. Think about physical storage, DBA activities, scheduling, all those different components. I used to be a data warehouse specialist in the past, and we wanted an analysis, and it took 17 different people to get this activity done. 17 different people, each one has its own manager. Well, this is very time consuming, error prone, you get it. So what does automation bring? Do we say that, well, all those activities are irrelevant? They didn't make sense? No. They do still make sense, but we just try to make them more consistent, integrated. Instead of using different toolings for each of those activities, different people, we just try to make it into a more integrated experience. Do we then take away all the choices your team can make? No, because if you just zoom in on a classical one, how to build a dimension, if you see here that 13 activities have been described, actually the first two are requirement specific. They require input from your smart team on site, and all the rest is based on patterns. And that's what we do. We automate not the decision making, but we automate all the easy part. And so it frees up your team to focus on what's more important. So we don't take away your freedom, your creativity, but we do take away all the activities that just take up time and don't make you happy and make you lose time. So you could have then 10 people developing dimensions exactly the same way, but also you could have one person, instead of implementing a 40-page design documents over the next 3 weeks, he could just be prototyping and saying, well, I had a conversation. Instead of having a 40-page document, I had a conversation with the business. I think I have an idea what they want. It's not clear. They're not clear either what they want. So let me just build out something. And what I'll do is I use automation, because if I have to rebuild the same thing 10 times, that's costing me a lot of time. But because of using automation, that is fully automated, so I can prototype. And once the business says, hey, your prototype number 14 in an afternoon is what we want, it is production ready. So that's another thing we bring to the table. So standardize your team and then give you all the tooling to work in an agile incremental approach. So as I was saying, is that you still, as a customer, as a partner, implementation partner, you get to make all the decisions. You get to choose which are the layers, technologies we're using. We are probably the most open platform in the marketplace to support you in the automation. So that's the clear division and responsibilities. You make the choices. We just then try to generate them in a consistent way, and out of that get increased productivity. What is automation? Well, most people, when they think about automation, is let me generate some code. So it's automating the development part, but that's only a tiny part of the full picture, because it doesn't make sense to have delivered a working prototype in an afternoon if it then will take you a week to get it deployed in production. So CI/CD deployment automation is important. Also, if you're working with data architects, they have an interesting job, that most models created by data architects, they are printed and remain on paper. So what if you could use those models as active designs and they are part of your development cycle? That makes a more compelling story to tell. Also, production. And probably most data warehouses people spend 60–70% on keeping the lights on of the current production environment. So making the management of your current production environment as easy as possible is an important factor. And then the one in red is the one which probably, if you're technical, and I have a very technical past, is the one you've been scared of. Because writing documentation and trusting documentation written by somebody else. So what if we can generate as much as possible documentation for you in an automated way? That's the different flavors of automation that tools like WhereScape bring together in one integrated suite. So a suite which has a design module called 3D, a build module called Red, which work together as our platform. And this slide has not been approved by our marketing department, created by me. But the message I'm gonna explain is that we generate code the ELT way, and it's not a black box. So you decide based on configuring templates, on what kind of methodology is being used. You can tune your code to be native for Azure SQL, to be native for specific patterns in Teradata. You are in full control of that. If you want to do it the ODS way, the Data Vault way, the 3NF way, that's all supported. And if you want to start off with the model-driven approach with a big bang rollout, or data-driven by prototyping in a sandbox, as Jacqueline said, that's all supported by us as well. But the end goal is that we are just selling you software, which is, if you use it in the right process, that can enable customers in some very compelling stories where you can fail fast, you can fail all the time, and save a lot of time by doing that. So the end result is it's faster, so you get the same warehouse you would build without an automation tool, but in a more cost-effective way. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Fred. We'd like to move on to a discussion on selected hotspots from the survey. The first hotspot says, a time-consuming development process and restricted support of self-service BI are the major drivers for modernizing the data warehouse. We can see the top 5 challenges that were identified by our participants here, and indeed, the topmost named issue is the time-consuming development process, which is something that Fred has pointed out in his presentation as well. But then, the second point, restricted support of self-service BI, appears to be also a major issue, followed by further issues concerning unable to provide required data, lack of user acceptance, and then a money-related issue that participants also felt that software licenses were too expensive in general. But apparently there is a need for more flexibility. There is apparently need to be faster in better meeting people's needs. Andy, I think you have a couple of questions.
Thanks, Jacqueline. What is this actually telling us, do you think, about the issues people are facing outside IT?
I think the detailed analysis we did on the different groups of users or groups of participants is quite interesting here. For example, to begin at the bottom of the list, the software licenses being too expensive were especially issues that were driven, of course, by executives. But there is another issue, too, that says the restricted support of self-service BI, which is very highly rated here. You would think that's an issue that's coming from business. And it's what I'm hearing from BI teams, too, that they say business wants to do self-service BI, even though we might not find it's that good to do. But actually, when you look at more detailed analysis, it appears that business users do not rate self-service BI as highly as, for example, executives do and BI and analytics teams. Now, you might wonder, why is this actually the fact? Is it just that they're doing it because they feel they have to? Because it's just the fact that the data warehouse and the BI systems do not deliver what they actually need, and perhaps the actual the actual reason for this is in effect the time-consuming development process. It takes so long to integrate new requirements that people don't have the time to wait for it, but have to find the solutions themselves. And that's why perhaps for business users, things like being able to provide the required data and matching their requirements and generating their acceptance is much more important than self-service itself.
Thanks for that. Yeah, it's very, very insightful, actually. Restricted support of self-service BI, is this something that the business actually cares about, do you think? What are the implications?
Well, I do a lot of interviews at client sites. I talk with business users, I talk with business analysts and power users, and they tell me they do an awful lot of self-service BI, even if it might not be with professional dedicated tools, but rather with Microsoft Excel. And they're actually pretty frustrated about that. They don't like doing it because they're stuck in recurring jobs. They're recreating standard reports in a manual way every month. And just because the data warehouse does not deliver the reports and the KPIs they actually need to serve the needs of the people in their line of business. And because of that, they don't have the time to actually do the creative analysis. They're stuck in recurring issues and don't have the freedom to look at what would be insightful for generating innovation for the business. And that's no good news for them. They would prefer to have a data warehouse environment that adapts to new requirements in an agile way. And so they would most probably profit exactly from what Fred was talking about before, automation, because that would perhaps make things faster and more agile.
And I guess, you know, the pace of business is ever increasing in speed, so yeah, even more paramount as we move forward. Frederick, actually, do you think all employees have the same view on the challenges and need for action? Do you think there maybe is a disparity between drivers for IT and business users?
Yeah, but I do think that we all want the same thing in the end. Sometimes, if you look at BI, we talk to both sides, and both sides are very can tell you in a lot of details why they're suffering because IT is too slow, or why does the business always keep changing their minds. Mm-hmm. But when you bring them together and you make them work together in a kind of unified way, how it all should have worked from the beginning. I joined business intelligence after graduating from university because I saw there an opportunity where people from the business and IT are working together. But then we came up with those huge teams and with specifications, and things got lost. I do remember in Germany going to a prospect where they gave me a 60-page Word document. Okay, these are the specs we're going to start building in 8 months, which we required. Those specs were documented 3 months already ago, and a 60-page document. So what if you can change that process by not having people write down requirements, just prototyping things together, work on it together, knowing that whenever you write down requirements, that they're wrong anyway. So knowing that you're just going to eventually get to something insightful and because what if we deliver 90% of what you want in 10 months time, but maybe in 10 months time, you've changed your strategy already. So what if we deliver you already next week, 20, 30%, and we keep working on that. So we try to bring, a business and IT closer together. So automation works perfectly as a pure technical enablement tool, but it starts to shine if you also then maybe potentially change your process around it, and get people to talk to each other again.
Yeah, fantastic. Very interesting. So demand for self-service BI, would you both say it's a consequence or a cause?
I think it depends on how you define self-service BI. And I'm sure that being forced into doing recurring work in self-service BI ways is not the best way to do things. You want things that are recurring to be automated. But on the other hand, if you want to do creative things to new questions that just comes to your mind, of course you want to be self-service enabled based on a good data foundation. So some things in self-service you want to have, and some things of self-service you don't want to have because you want it to be automated.
Yeah, and so typically organizations have one way of dealing with a data question, and then self-service can be a consequence because they compensate for the lack of speed, agility of the BI of the technical team. But self-service BI, I look at data science that you need to give people freedom, sandboxes to experiment with, but they shouldn't then be going and connect to source systems to get new data, and that's an IT activity. So coming up with some kind of an internal classification of, okay, these are the typical data questions, data initiatives that can start in a pure sandbox approach by a business team, a joint team, or these are activities that actually need to be tackled by IT immediately. But if they need to be tackled by IT immediately, they need to deliver faster than they used to. So onboarding a new source system and providing an auditable historical trail of the changes over time, that is an IT complexity, which is highly automatable and should be able to be delivered fast. But then on top of that, start building new insights, prototyping. That could be something done together with the business, of course.
Absolutely. And Jacqueline, what would you say is the upside of giving business users the power of self-service BI?
To empower them to generate insights from well-structured data that is provided to them. But it is certainly not an upside if you are forcing business to do recurring things over and over again, and if you're forcing them to deal with some complexity that is very time consuming. Rather use their creativity, as Fred said, and service them with a sandbox environment so that they can work on innovative questions and innovative ideas.
Excellent. And one final question before we move on to the next hotspot, and you may have already covered it actually, but what are the right measures would you say to make the data warehouse and BI fit for the future, really?
Well, I think we've been speaking about them. You're right, and I think the key is to make your standard data warehouse environment as lean and as agile as possible. So focus on what is important, and focus on making what you need to do, being able to do the job in a very fast way. And on the other hand, opening up your overall data usage architecture for other use cases as well. So the BI factory is only one part of the whole picture. Yes, you need a BI factory, and this BI factory should be lean and agile, but on the other hand, you need other environments as well. You need laboratory environments, and you have to be able to service your operational environment with data and analytics as well. So I guess that's, and that's actually, as we will see as we move on, what leaders are working on.
Yeah, that's it in a nutshell, really, though, isn't it, Jacqueline? Should we move on to hotspot 2 then, Jacqueline?
Sure.
Fantastic.
Hotspot 2 says the primary modernization approach is indeed data warehouse ETL automation. And when we take a closer look at the benefits that it generates, we can see that automation helps promote a broad usage of the data warehouse. That's what the participants told us. But on the other hand, concerning improved efficiency in data management processes, the outcome is not so clear. And I think that's pretty interesting. So when we look at the two boxes here, we see the top 5 approaches as well as the top 5 technologies to data warehouse modernization. And top of the list are the data warehouse ETL automation approach, with 60% of participants saying they choose this approach, but also a good group of 45% choose to make better use of their hardware. On the other hand, looking at the technologies, we see data integration technology being used, but also data warehouse automation as technology, and also data modeling tools, which perhaps matches data marts being the third most often named approach to data warehouse modernization. Also interesting is the answer on analytic databases, and here maybe some detailed analysis when we look at leaders and what they're doing. Apparently, analytic databases play a much more important role for leaders, and on the other side, data marts play a much less important role for leaders, which might mean that these two things somehow are related to each other, which is perhaps an indication that based on modern technologies, you can benefit from a leaner architecture, perhaps by doing less data marts if you base your data warehouse on an analytic database.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Data warehouse automation and ETL automation, keen to get your views on, are they the same thing or something different from your perspective?
Well, we actually think they're very different, but we hear from our customers that these two things are often seen as synonyms. Now, ETL automation is the process of automating your ETL processes. So ETL processes are usually run in batch, and yes, of course, it makes sense to automate these batch processes. But data warehouse automation is actually something different, or it's actually more. Of course, when you do data warehouse automation, of course, you obviously want to automate your batch processes as well. But the key issue here is that you want to automize your development process. And we can pick up here what Fred was telling us before, that when you develop your code for filling your data warehouse, you're often doing things that happen over and over again. For example, historization. And those are things that are not really creative, and it would be really nice if you had a button you could just push and tell the machine to go ahead and do something that everyone knows how it is to be done.
Yeah,
and that's
a pattern that can be automated, right? It's a pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a pattern to automate your development. And that's, I think, why also you can see that it makes sense to look at the underlying technology from two different perspectives. That data integration tools help you develop ETL and help you automate your ETL processes, but they not necessarily help you do data warehouse automation. Although, of course, there are also some platforms that enable you to do a similar thing, but then you have to take a closer look. Whereas data automation tools, they are explicitly geared towards automating this development process based on patterns.
Absolutely. And just quickly, I guess, and you kind of covered it already, but would you say typically enterprise organizations are always or mostly looking to specifically discuss data warehouse automation? You know, is it its own category, I guess, from your perspective?
I think enterprises are becoming more aware of data warehouse automation, but then again, if we looked at the detailed analysis in the survey, we can see that leaders are much more geared towards data warehouse automation than followers and laggards are. So it appears to be that the leaders are much more aware of the benefits in data warehouse automation than others are.
And Fred, kind of leading off the back of that, would you say, or keen to get your view on how the data warehouse conversation maybe has changed over the past couple of years, and how maybe you see it changing further going forward?
Yeah, so there is a big difference between my point of view and Jacqueline's, is because Jacqueline did an analysis of in the market, and also with people that probably never considered data warehouse automation before. So me being part of the WhereScape team, I obviously only talk to people who are interested in that notion. So I have a skewed view. But that has changed over the years. So 5 years ago, when I was part of a 3-man team in Europe for WhereScape, it was all about education. It was finding the brave souls, the leaders, the visionaries that saw the benefits of automation. While now, if we fast forward only 5 years, we do get very complex RFI documents for big enterprise customers that are doing in data warehouse automation tool selection. So a lot has changed. So I also think that the leaders now, we've kind of start dealing over the last few years with the followers. I do see different categories. So sometimes I'm lucky. Every 2 weeks, I'm lucky to talk to a company, a prospect, where they're building their very first analytical platform. So they now have the choice to build it from scratch using automation. So that's obviously, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. A lot of the time, we're talking to people who are still in layer 1 or 2, based on Jacqueline's presentation earlier. So they're doing the data mart things, but now for one reason or another, they're replatforming. And so this is for them a trigger to kind of now reassess all their processes and techniques. So they weren't looking for data warehouse automation, but because they're replatforming, they're now observing the marketplace and trying to onboard to new trends because they have now an opportunity to do that. And then the third category is then enterprise customers that have built out over the last few years a successful warehouse that are looking to scale it even more. They might already be using in-house built automation frameworks or generators, but they want this to scale even more. So yeah, a lot has changed. I think automation, also what we see is that consultancy firms now are advising their customers, hey, dear customer, you know, you have great people of ours here. They're not cheap, but by using automation, you might even use them in a better way, in a more successful way. And while 5 years ago we were seen as threats, we're now seen as a catalysator to help them to get even more customer satisfaction out of it.
Thanks, Fred. That was a real clear articulation of the different scenarios. So fantastic. I think in the interest of time, Jacqueline, we'll perhaps move on to Hotspot 3, if that's okay.
Sure. Okay, so Hotspot 3 is telling us that leaders rely less on data mart deployment than on lean, flexible architectures and usable data based on cloud services, a complementary data lake, data governance, data hubs, and data catalogs. And you can see this in the chart. It's split up between the different maturity levels in the data landscape. At the top, the group that has localized data processing down to the agile interoperable data services at the bottom. And the color coding shows you that the same colored the same colors are dedicated to the same answers. So we can see everyone finds that data warehouse and ETL automation is very important, and they choose this to modernize their data warehouse. But further on, the answers are actually pretty heterogeneous, and where the laggards and the followers, all three are focused on better use of hardware. You can see that the leaders, that both groups of leaders are more focused on use of cloud services. So they're not so much focused on optimizing the use of their own infrastructure, but say, hey, if we need more agile infrastructure, then let's move on to the cloud. So that's one interesting finding. Another thing is if you look at the bottom group, so the topmost level of maturity, you can see data lake as a data warehouse extension. So using a data lake to feed other analytics needs, for example, in a sandbox environment, or using data hubs and data cataloging to make data more useful for users, to make it more findable, more accessible, and to keep an overview on the various touch points that the data is actually being used. So make data usage more agile, but also make it more controllable as well, so that I can fulfill my compliance requirements.
That's great, Jacqueline. And what do you think this is telling us about the challenges faced by your audience?
Well, I think we can see quite clearly that the first three levels of maturity are still very focused on getting their BI factory working. and to build up the standardized data warehousing concept that has been seen as best practice for all the last decades. But then as we see, as enterprises move on to more innovative requirements and needs, it seems they have finalized the job of making their BI factory lean and agile, and can therefore concentrate much more on building an overall, a more global, a more holistic data landscape that serves other needs than only the BI factory.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just building on that, Fred, how do you think this compares to what you see from a vendor perspective?
Yeah, can only agree. I think for my complete career being in back-end data warehousing land, the last few years have been the most interesting years, where we see that business intelligence development, the traditional ETL development has been, I think, it's 2000 till 2010 been very stagnant, and that now things are changing. I do think, and I have to disagree with Jacqueline. We had a prep call, and she says, well, all new initiatives typically happen in the US and then come to the EMEA region. From emotional reasons, I have to disagree with that one. But what I learned as being part of a global automation firm is that regional aspects are so important. I never expected that to see so big differences between different continents, but also within Europe, to see so big differences in methodologies being used. So if I can highlight one, is for instance, Data Vault, which is now by a lot of people used as a modeling style to do the data foundation. It has been a very interesting adventure to see that how Data Vaults, which from my point of view is more dominant in Europe than in the US, but to see in Europe how it kind of onboarded country after country. I remember going to the big conferences in Germany a few years ago, and then you had two people talk about it. They heard something about it, and the next year they were trained, and a brave person had done a project with it, and then now a lot of people are doing it, and then see that the Nordics now have adopted this as well. And so the latest observation is that everybody in Finland has gone Data Vault crazy for some reason or another. So that makes it very interesting to see how different people are onboarding new ideas, all linked to can we organize our team? Can we organize our layered architecture better so we in the end get a more flexible way of working?
Thanks, Fred. Just quickly chipping in, feel free to start sending some chat questions through for the Q&A. We're into the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes of the call. Whilst they're coming through though, Fred and Jacqueline, just on the cloud piece and just building on the kind of adoption of automation in the different countries and continents, regards cloud, do you think cloud services are driving demand, or is demand driving cloud services?
I think both is true, because it's this typical situation that on one hand you have the providers that believe in their new services and of course want to bring them to market and do that in a very intensive way, and that makes people start discussing about it. But on the other hand, as we've learned today, there's a high need for flexibility. And it is indeed one outcome of the survey that people are struggling with limited flexibility in their infrastructure. So yes, there is a real need as well. So both is true. And I mean, just speaking from a Germany perspective, we have seen the adoption being picked up in the last 2 years immensely. Now, Germany is a rather conservative country concerning this kind of innovation, and there has been a lot of insecurity concerning? Does it really make sense to move to the cloud? Is my data safe there, etc.? But the perspective has changed, and people are really picking that up much more. But I think the challenge lies in how do you approach this? And if you just choose a rip and replace approach, you probably won't be able to harvest the benefits you actually want to.
Great, thanks for that. And we've had our first question in, I'm pleased to say. Ron Karen, where does WhereScape Red fit into the architecture for companies looking to build and adopt a data lake solution? On to you, Fred.
Okay, so gone are probably the days where every customer is loading all its data immediately into a data warehouse and wants to use a kind of a layered approach. So yes, we definitely can help and then use automation to get the data in a data lake, or to unlock data from a data lake and load then a subset of the information into an integrated data model in a data warehouse. So we just extend our value proposition over that. That's what we do. We also sometimes see that, referring back to my first slide, is that people are using CDC tools, replication tools to get the data into a data lake, and that WhereScape as an automation tools only starts from there onwards. So there are more use cases out there, but we are definitely relevant in that area.
Many thanks for that, Fred. I'm just going to give it a couple of seconds and see if any other questions come in. But whilst that's happening, I'd just like to thank you both for your time and contribution to the discussion today. This session has been recorded, as mentioned earlier. We'll also make the research report available after the call as well. And rest assured, any questions, feel free to reach out to the three of us after the call, and we will respond promptly after the event. So I think that's it. I can't see anything unless Fred or Jacqueline, you can see anything coming in. So I think that's it on the strike of 11 o'clock UK time. Thanks for joining today. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.